Do you want to know what the worst thing about being a YouTuber is? At least for me, mentally speaking. It's the fact that you want every video to be perfect. There's just something in your brain that always thinks, if I'm going to make a video about this thing, if I'm going to put a bunch of time and effort into creating an artistic diatribe about why I like or dislike something, then it should be the best possible thing it can be. And when you look back and you see that, not the best possible thing it could have been, not anymore at least, not in my opinion, as the person who made it, you get mad, you get angry, you get pretty upset, and you decide to get rid of that thing. And in the process of doing that, you create this patchwork history of a YouTube life where there's certain things that are known about you, but anybody new coming in can't see why they're known about you. Case in point, I'm a massive simp for Supergirl, and there's nothing on my channel that explains that. There's just occasional little jokes in my videos and a running gag of people making fun of me on Modular Media. And that's fine. That's totally cool. But, like, I feel like we need to correct that. So let's do that. Hey everybody, what's going on? I'm the Vacuuminator, a guy who busts his ass right down to the newest parking lot he can find to get in front of a church, to take you to church during golden hour to talk about his number one golden girl favorite fictional character. Might be a bit of an unhealthy obsession crush type thing, and that is the DC Comics character Supergirl, aka Zor-El, cousin of Superman, Clark Kent, Kal-El, that guy who everybody always talks about. Big talky boy, big boy who gets talked about a lot here on YouTube and in the popular culture in general, because he's one of the biggest American icons. He's one of the most well-known superheroes of all time because he's kind of perceived as the first. And because there's been so much Superman content over the years, a lot of people like to discuss what is good or what isn't good about Superman, what makes Superman Superman. And because of that, as tends to happen across history, his cousin tends to get left in the dust a little bit. Even though she's had a fair amount of media, she's a fairly well-known character these days. She's got a big old movie in the works right now, and I've got opinions. I've got so many opinions. Because you see, dear viewer, Supergirl is my favorite character in all of fiction. Forget any Kamen Rider, any Power Ranger, any Transformer, any other Western superhero you could possibly think of. It is Supergirl who I think about the most, and I'm going to take as much time as I can before the sun completely goes down to outline my opinions and my thoughts and my feelings and why I like her so much, and then maybe we'll also do a brief overview of her history if we have time, if God and Jesus allow it. But before we can do all that, this is a YouTube video, so I of course have to do the YouTube things. I have to remind you to engage with the algorithm, like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell in order to enable notifications so that you know when all my videos are coming out. Patreon, t-shirt store, collab podcast channel, check out all that stuff. Maybe I'll go over it again towards the end of the video. Right now, I really don't care. It's cold. I want to talk about my wife. So to start off, I think it's important that we recognize a key difference in who Superman and Supergirl are, because Superman is often viewed as an immigrant allegory. He's a guy who came from a distant planet as a baby, grew up here as a human, but has certain traits and aspects of who he is that make him special and set apart from everybody else in our world, and he's doing his best to live up to that legacy and just be an all-around good boy by the culture he grew up in's standards. And that's all well and good and great, and gosh darn holy moly, I like it. I do have a lot of respect and love for Big Blue Boy Scout man. I've read a lot of his comics, I've watched a lot of his adaptations, and I think he's an all-around great character. But the thing that fascinates me about Supergirl is she is not an immigrant. She's a refugee. She grew up on Krypton. She knew what that place was like, and when she was at one of the most emotionally volatile stages in a person's life, it was all taken away from her at a moment's notice. Everything she'd ever known and loved, gone in an instant. Except in some interpretations of the origin, it's even worse than that. Like the original, which has now been retconned to be the current understanding of the origin again, the world didn't just blow up. It started slowly coming apart. Her dad latched their city together into like its own little floating space station thing for a while. Then the ground beneath their feet turned to poison irradiated rocks. They erected a lead shield to try and deal with that. Then a meteor shower destroyed the lead shield, and then her dad was just straight up like, all right, that's it, we're all gonna fucking die. I guess I can send you in a remake of My Uncle's Pod to go watch after your cousin. Would you like that? Would you be okay with that? Oh, you're too emotionally distant and disassociated now to really process this? All right, just get in the pod, Kara. Just get in the fucking pod. Go protect baby Cal. And then she goes in the fucking pod. Crazy, kooky space bullshit happens, and she ends up arriving on Earth decades later when Cal has already grown up to be a full-grown man who doesn't need her protection, and their relationship is totally different than what she would expect it to be, and she's got to adjust to this whole different world with technology that's way behind what she had as a little baby. And oh yeah, she's got crazy superpowers that she's having to learn to control all at once, unlike Superman, who got them slowly over the course of his childhood. It's kind of a bonkers thing to think about. It would really fuck up any normal person and maybe turn them into a supervillain. But the thing that makes Supergirl so great to me is all of that happens to her, but because she has this strong will and this want to do good and be a good, kind person, she still chooses to follow in her cousin's example, put on a cape, put on a costume, and go out there and help people day in and day out. That is deeply inspiring to me, and it has been ever since I first discovered it. You know, I've talked on this channel before about how Justice League Unlimited was what got me into superheroes as a wider universe as a kid, but Supergirl's origin isn't really covered in that show. She has a lot of spotlight episodes that are very good and got me interested in the character, but it wasn't until a few years later, when I was a young teenager myself getting into comics for the first time, that I learned about her actual origin story. And I'm not gonna lie, the first time I learned about it, it actually really helped me with some mental bullshit I was going through at the time. Like, we're talking full-on off-yourself bullshit here. And I kind of credit Supergirl with actually saving my life because of that. It feels silly to say, and I made it very melodramatic in the first version of this video I did a few years ago, which is now lost to the annals of the internet. But I'd be lying if I described it in any less of a way. I was feeling really upset about the way the world and life is, and I wasn't really sure if I wanted to go through it and become a big boy. And then I read about what Supergirl went through, and I said, oh, if she can go through all that and still go out there and be a good person day in and day out, get out of bed, put her boots on, and go help people, well then fuck, I've got nothing to complain about. So can I. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. And that's what makes a lot of my favorite characters. That's what makes superheroes in general so great, is that they serve as an inspiration to us to be better, to try and do more than we normally would on our own. That gets at the core of just what makes fiction so great, is that it helps us contextualize our own feelings about the world. Like, yes, everything is terrible and horrible, and people are going through painful experiences, both mentally and physically, all the time, but life is still worth living. It's still worth getting out there and experiencing the universe. And Supergirl was one of the first characters who really taught me that at a critical point in my development as a person. And that's kind of why I've clung on to her all in life, even to the point of just letting an earbud fall out of my ear mid-sentence. But of course, that's just the impetus for why I like the character. That's not the whole story, because that was back when I was a teenager, and I'm in my late 20s now, and I've had a lot of time to read through most, if not all, of Kara's history, which started way back in 1950s times, folks. This is an old-ass character. Even though she hasn't had nearly the amount of exposure as her cousin, she's had just about as much time for development, and you can really see that not a lot of people have taken a lot of advantage of that. Because when Kara was first introduced into Pages of Action comics, her origin was kinda just glossed over in order to get her into a comic booky status quo of the time, which was that she had her own adventures as Supergirl, but they were always in secret because she was growing up as an orphan and Superman's secret weapon. He actually first told her, you need to not live with me, not associate with me as much as possible, so that we can give the world time to get to a place where it's okay to reveal you. And also, it would be cool if, in case anything ever happened to me, there was another super person waiting in the wings to deal with whatever shit my villains were getting up to. And it's like, yeah, fair enough, Soups. I guess that's kind of forward thinking. But also, this girl's just gone through a lot, and now you're shoving her in a kind of shitty living situation with a bunch of kids who aren't going to be able to know or understand what she's been through and may end up being kind of cruel towards her. What the fuck? And from there, she kind of just goes on kooky, fun superhero adventures of the time. She gets her own couple of super pets. She fights some villains here and there. Gets her own couple of rivals. Even hangs out with the Legion of Superheroes a whole bunch. And it's good. It's fine. I don't mind early Silver Age Supergirl, but it is very of its time, and it doesn't really speak to why I like the character. However, I would hesitate to call it at all bad or stereotypical. I've read a lot of historical documentation about like fandom culture of comics at this time, and it seems like a lot of people did really enjoy these early stories, that they were considered good for their time. And even though they're not what her creator Otto Binder is most well known for, there's still a significant portion of people who always cite him as like being a major influence because of these stories. Where I do tend to get a little uppity is the fact that this version of Kara just kind of continues on that trajectory. She does eventually get her own book after having gotten adopted and having her own adventures as a super person that's known to the world, and she goes off to college and does some fun stuff. But really, after her introduction and initial Action Comics story, there's not a lot of note that happens with Kara, not a ton of character development. She's just kind of average stereotypical white lady of the time, and eventually kind of fades into the background of DC until the time of Crisis on Infinite Earths comes around, and probably the most famous thing that's ever happened to Supergirl happens, which is that she gets fucking kill-obliterated by the Anti-Monitor, and it's very sad and very well done, and it's genuinely one of my favorite moments in comics. I think it's what put Supergirl on the map for a lot of people, but it does kind of suck that the thing your favorite character is most known for is dying. Especially because it caused a lot of wonkiness with her brand going forward. Because the whole reason she was killed off was editorial wanted Superman to go back to being the last son of Krypton. They wanted to get a little bit more pathos back into the character, so they got rid of Kara and all the super pets and a bunch of other characters, and they kind of rebooted him from the ground up. And I don't mind that reboot, but I do lament that it took so long to get Kara back after consider that time, because I don't count Matrix Supergirl or Gooper Girl or whatever you want to call her, because that's not Kara Zor-El. That is Matrix pretending to be a facsimile of Kara Zor-El, and it's a whole different character, and I don't really care for her books. Sorry, I know people really like the Peter David run. It's not my jam. It's actually kind of anti my jam, but whatever, to each their own. I'm glad it's long over now, though. However, all that being said, it's not like what came next for Kara was all that much better, because man, do I feel conflicted about post-crisis Supergirl. Because on the one hand, it is kind of gross and exploitative how she's drawn most of the time. The writing is very hit and miss depending on the story, and on the other, this is what was going on when I first got into comics. Sure, I came in towards the tail end of it when things started getting better during the Sterling Gates run, but it's still this weird kind of problematic era where they leaned a little too much into Kara being a teenager and almost fetishized her at points, and had a whole arc about her having an abusive boyfriend, which kind of it came off like it was trying to say something really good and strong and inspiring for young girls, but just couldn't quite get there, at least in my opinion. And I don't know, man. It's weird, because, like, I want to like this era. When I think of Supergirl, the costume that first comes to mind, the costume that she was wearing in the comics when I got into the character, was the post-crisis one. But also, the post-crisis one just ain't that great. Because, like, look at it. She's wearing a belly shirt and a fucking miniskirt. That's not appropriate attire for a superheroine. It's just not. But again, that's not to say it's all bad. I would recommend checking out certain things that came out of this era. Like, there's a great issue of Superman/Batman where her and Damian Wayne Robin team up. There's a really good tie-in to Amazon's Attack, of all things. Amazon's Attack, notoriously garbage DC Comics event, but actually had a decent tie-in from Supergirl, of all things. And the Sterling Gates run in general, while a little wonky at times, is much better than the early stuff where they're just kind of hot potatoing her around between artists and writers. And I don't love this version of the origin, but I mean, like, if you're gonna go for just a quick what is Supergirl's origin, maybe check out the animated adaptation of it. That's decent. That's decent. And then, of course, there is New 52 Supergirl, which is the first time I read a Supergirl series all the way through from start to finish as it was coming out, and I have to admit, I do think this is a step up from post-crisis, but there are still things it gets really wrong and are kind of weird. Specifically how it handles the origin, where it very much does the New 52 thing of trying to make it a little more grim and gritty, portraying her parents as having had a huge argument that led to her accidentally getting sent to Earth, and not a fan of that. I kind of like the idea that Kara's parents actually liked each other. That was just a weird thing they did for a minute there. The costume in this era is definitely ass. This is actually a huge step down from the post-crisis one, in my opinion. I don't like that it's a one-piece bathing suit type thing. I don't like that she has like a weird diaper thing instead of a skirt. I don't get giving her huge, like, thigh-high boots with the knees cut out. To me, that kind of defeats the point of having boots that long, but whatever, I don't know. Short hair's a cool idea, but other than that, there actually is a lot to like about this era. Like, the fact that it's probably the longest it ever takes Kara to get acclimated to Earth, and she never really truly does. She's always grappling with where she fits in on the Earth of this version of the DC Universe, and doesn't even spend all that much time with Superman. They have an early encounter, which has a detail I absolutely love about her thinking he's some kind of hoax or traitor because his Kryptonian Californian accent doesn't sound right. But after that, she's mostly doing her own thing for the most part, kind of longing for Krypton to come back, but also doing the best she can to get used to this new life that's been thrust upon her and all these powers and everything, and meeting various kooky characters along the way. Like, probably my favorite thing about this whole run, New 52 Silver Banshee, who isn't a villain, but is just kind of a nice artsy immigrant girl who befriends Kara because thanks to her powers, she can actually understand Kryptonese right away and starts teaching her English. I really wish they had actually done more with these two as friends, and there's still time to do that because, like, a lot of New 52 continuity has carried over, like this version of Silver Banshee, who actually showed up in the current Superman book recently. Of course, the big thing everybody loves about this era is Red Lantern Supergirl. A big overarching thing with the book was exploring Kara's anger and grief over the destruction of Krypton, which led to her briefly becoming a member of the Red Lantern Corps. And, like, that stuff's cool. It's definitely better than I thought it was going to be when it was first announced, but I also think people tend to overblow it. It's much more of like a footnote. It's a high boiling point for that part of her character arc, and she then starts to change things after having been that way for a few issues. It's not really like this huge era of Supergirl as it tends to be made out to be. But that's the big thing I really like about New 52 Supergirl, is the very consistent development of Kara as a character. It doesn't always portray her in the best light that I would like, but it always feels logical from issue 1 onwards. Even though it tends to change writers about every other arc or so, it always feels like I'm still reading the same take on Supergirl and like there's a plan for the character, which is kind of a miracle considering this was a New 52 book. Unfortunately, I kind of can't say the same for Rebirth Supergirl, because my opinion of that series is basically the inverse of my opinion on the New 52 one. I love this costume. This costume is a perfect update on the original that should be her evergreen costume in my opinion, but the bulk of the storytelling in the actual comic ain't that great, because this was when the Supergirl CW show was airing and was at the height of its popularity, and so DC said, make the comic like the show, as they tend to whenever any adaptation tends to get real traction in the public eye, because for some reason comic book publishers think an adaptation getting popular equals a comic getting popular, and that's just never happened, and it always makes for awkward results, like this comic, which just kind of feels like a hard left turn out of all the character development New 52 was doing into making a status quo that is really like the show, and it's just kind of stiff and awkward to read. There's parts of it I like I do like that they follow up on the New 52 version of Cyborg Superman being Kara's dad and actually executing a villain plot with him in an interesting way that kind of does some stuff for her character. And there's a great one-shot issue about her just helping a non-binary person through some of their personal bullshit and eventually get up the courage to come out to their parents. But other than that, not a lot to like about this run, especially after Bendis came into the Superman book, shook everything up, and then got the Supergirl book shooken up as well. It actually got worse after that, because the plot of Supergirl's book went from we're just doing what the show does but with comic book characters to maybe Supergirl should try and actually figure out if Rogol Zaar was telling the truth. Maybe she should go try and hunt down Rogol Zaar and all of his accomplices. Maybe she should be a big intergalactic asshole who storms into the Green Lantern archives and just ignores all these Lanterns who are her friends and are trying to help her in order to be a big bitch and do stupid shit. Also, there's a very obvious self-insert MyOC do not steal character at this point in the book who tends to take over a lot of the story and make issue concepts that would otherwise be great come off as really grating and annoying, and I hate it. I hate late game Rebirth Supergirl. It is so bad. Please do not read it. And it was after that we didn't get any Supergirl outside of the show for a while, because, well, you make bad comics for a while, people are gonna stop buying them, and when sales tank these days, publishers tend to just assume, like, oh, people don't want to read about that character anymore. We can't greenlight series about them anymore, which is a shame unless we have some real star power behind it, which is what thankfully happened for Kara, because about a year or so after this, DC's current golden boy, star writer, hugely divisive man who I actually happen to really like most of his work, Tom King, was just kind of poking around DC going like, who can I do a book for? Who needs my help? Supergirl, let me do a book for you. I'm not joking. That's literally how he describes the decision-making process to do this. And he got given a 8-issue miniseries called Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, and I have to tell you, I absolutely adore this thing. I'm not going to go too deep into my thoughts right now because we're actually going to be doing this on the Modular Media Club podcast, Analytical Fanboys, at the end of the month. So if you want to hear me and all my friends discuss it in depth, definitely head over there and subscribe to @ModularMedia here on YouTube. But suffice it to say, this book was a watershed moment for the character in many ways. For me personally, it was the first time I felt like Supergirl was really written the way I imagine her. This brave and intelligent person who is trying to project being a kind and courageous superhero, but inside is filled with a lot of trauma and inner turmoil and is just doing the best she can. And it's all portrayed through a point of view character that's original for the book, but is very compelling in her own right. And I'm not going to spoil much of the story for her, but just know it is literally described by pretty much everybody who's read it and Tom King himself as true grit in space, with some of the most gorgeous modern comic book art I've ever seen. I'd never heard of Belquist Evely before this book, but goddamn, is she somebody I'm paying attention to now, because she drew my girl beautifully. But I'm not the only one who felt this way about the book. It had a ton of buzz all while it was going on. I constantly saw people reviewing this thing going, man, I've never really paid much attention to Supergirl, but Tom King is really doing her justice here. This is great. Why isn't this being printed in oversized format? Why aren't we getting a hardcover of this? Why isn't this getting all the awards? And it did get nominated for some awards, but I don't think it won any. I'll correct myself in editing if it did. And one of the people who was reading it and saying that was James freaking Gunn. And when he got control of DC Studios, in his initial slate, he announced that they are making a direct adaptation of this comic as a big budget live action movie. And I gotta tell you, when I saw that announcement, I literally did the full-on fanboy thing of, and I was at work at the time. I was fucking cleaning some fucking classroom or some shit. And I was at work, and I was watching I took a break to watch the James Gunn video, and he got to that announcement, and I saw him say, we're making Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, and he loved the story, one of his favorite comics in recent years. The Belquist Evely art was scrolling across the screen. I did the full-on fanboy thing. I screamed, I started shaking, I teared up a little, because Tom King is in the writing room of DC Studios. I'm almost certain he's gonna be writing the script. He's gonna write the adapted screenplay of his own comic. So I have very little fear of this adaptation being bad. Yes, there's a lot of turmoil at Warner Brothers and DC right now, but given that James Gunn has said this is one of his favorite modern things, and Tom King is right there to help shepherd it, oh man, I think I might finally get to see an adaptation of Supergirl that reflects my view of her. I might get to see the public view of her reflected to more so be my view of her, and that is so exciting.
And this is where editing Vac has to cut in to say, as tends to happen with these kind of things sometimes, in the time since I recorded this video, Ana Nogueira has been announced as the writer for the Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow movie, who is somebody I've never heard of before, so I have to admit I was a little disappointed that it's not actually going to be Tom King adapting the screenplay, but the projects she's worked on are fairly well known as quality in the circles I travel in, and I've been angling towards just trusting Gunn and Safran in general right now until they've actually put something out together. So I'm not entirely upset by this, and I'm still fairly confident in and excited for the movie. Hopefully it comes out fairly well and doesn't get fucking cancelled.
Because the sun's almost down, I don't have a ton of time to talk about adaptations, but I'll just let you know real quick. I like her in the Timverse. Not the best adaptation in hindsight, but pretty good. In most of the animated films, she's alright, and the CW show is hot garbage. I'm sorry, it just is. I'm in that camp that doesn't care for most of the Arrowverse. Like, the first 2 seasons of Arrow and the first season of Flash were alright. Everything else, kinda garbo. Kinda super mega garbo, actually. And I don't love that show is the modern sort of viewpoint of what Supergirl is. And I don't love that even if that didn't exist, the Helen Slater movie would be the modern viewpoint of what Supergirl is. Because that movie's not the worst thing ever, but it's also far from the best thing ever, and it ain't a good Supergirl adaptation. There's just not been a good live-action Supergirl adaptation. The closest we've gotten is the version of Supergirl that was in The Flash, and even then, it's like, well, that's in the Ezra Miller Flash movie. People shouldn't really be too excited about that. And that's not to speak ill will of any of the actresses. I think Helen Slater, Melissa Benoist, and Sasha Calais all did really good jobs with the material they were given, but the material still wasn't great. I want a Supergirl adaptation that has a great actress in the role and has really good material for her, and I think this is the best chance we're ever going to get. So I have high hopes for Woman of Tomorrow, especially because there's a rumor going around that now, because of the success of Barbie, Greta Gerwig might get the job as director. Yes, friggity frackin' please. And that about brings us to a close, but I would be remiss if I didn't also talk about the latest bit of Supergirl content in the comics, which is the Supergirl special that came out at the end of last month, written by Mariko Tamaki and drawn by Skylar Partridge, I believe it is. Interesting one-shot, because it comes at such an odd time for the Super Family in general, because there is a renewed focus on the Super Family. All the characters tend to be hanging out together in Action Comics and Superman's main book, but there's not a ton of side books. There was a Steel miniseries. Power Girl's got a book right now. John Kent had a couple books. Superboy just had a miniseries. And here's a one-shot for you, Supergirl. But I will say, I really did like the one-shot. It didn't do a ton of work in developing the character, but it gave me confidence that the characterization we saw in Woman of Tomorrow is going to stick, because it's a story that's very much in that vein. It's very much about her having trouble adjusting to Earth, longing for Krypton, being worried about her memories for Krypton starting to fade, and worrying about her place in the family in general now that Power Girl has a renewed prominence, and ultimately realizing that as much as that stuff will be there, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. What matters is that she's Supergirl and she's here to help people. It was a nice little one-shot and gave me renewed confidence in DC's handling of Kara as a character, and kind of turned me around on Mariko Tamaki a little bit as a writer, because she did an out-of-continuity series called Supergirl Being Super that was basically, what if Supergirl had Superman's origin? And I didn't really care for that, just because it kind of inherently robbed her of everything that made her special as a character to me. But it was still fairly well done, so I couldn't call it outright trash. And now that I've seen Mariko Tamaki write a proper in-continuity Supergirl, I go, oh no, she gets the character, and she's a good writer. I'll probably check out some more Mariko Tamaki stuff now. So good job all around on the Supergirl special, and just generally feels like a good time to be a Supergirl fan again. When I originally made my first Supergirl video, it was kind of in a place of feeling like I had to defend the character because the CW show was still airing, and I felt like it was putting out this very wrong perception of who the character is, and I felt like, oh, people don't get Supergirl because they keep trying to attach attributes of her to Superman with wanting to make him super angsty over the destruction of Krypton and all that. And now it feels like we're finally getting to a good place with this character that I love so much. We've got the special, we've got a Woman of Tomorrow movie coming up. There's all manner of other things they could do with her. I honestly would be very happy if Tamaki and Partridge get given an ongoing based on the success of the special. And she's got a couple action figures coming up. Everybody knows me. They know I am a toy man. I am the Superman villain, the Toy Man. In fact, I collect many toys, and I used to have a fairly sizable Supergirl collection. I cut it down to just one figure, my favorite figure of her at the time, the Icons one, which is a great action figure, but it's kind of dated now. So the fact that she just got a DC Multiverse figure and they announced a amazing Yamaguchi Rebel Tech of her, oh boy, definitely want to get my hands on both of those. So there it is. There's the Supergirl video. There's the new Supergirl video. It's far from perfect. It's definitely going to be something that I'll look back on in a few years and go, ooh, could have done that way better, Chief. But, you know what? I got it out. I got it done before the sun went completely down. It's twilight now. There's going to be a new moon out any second, and I personally need to go break dawn in the editing room and get this out for many reasons. The most of which is that it's getting cold. So thank you all for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell. Support me on Patreon if you don't mind. Just $1 a month. You get a monthly behind-the-scenes podcast, early access to videos, and your names in the end screen. I also have a shirt store where you can get this shirt, and I have a podcast channel where I talk about comics live every Sunday night with my buddy Boingo Writer. It's called the No Prize Podcast on Modular Media, at Modular Media here on YouTube. And that's going to do it, folks. So, until next time, remember, you never truly fail until you stop trying. So always keep trying to make the best video you can make, and don't worry about it being perfect, because, you know what? Your favorite character would probably be proud that you just went out and did it because it needed to be done. Until next time.